Well, hello and welcome to the SpeakEasy. Almost said the live cast then, so you've been out of practice doing this. But hello, welcome to the SpeakEasy. My name's Paul Feasy, and as always, I'm joined by
Nate Morgan-Locke.
And Glenn Scrivener.
Hey.
Yeah. Hey. It rhymes with Feasy. The Speakeasy with Feasy.
Yeah, exactly. It should be easy for me to remember. Yes, yes. So, everyone okay?
I think we're doing all right. We're getting our Christmas. Two of us are getting our Christmases on.
No.
Yeah.
I've got my Darth Christmas.
Festive.
I've got a plan for how I can wear a Christmas jumper by the end of this episode.
Are you going to sneak it off us?
Concerned.
Where's my watch
Concerned.
gone? Where's my jumper
Yeah.
gone? That's a real trick.
I'm not going to do that. But just, I think it's going to come up. I think it's going to be relevant in what we're talking about.
Well, I've got a Star Wars jumper, which is fine. I think it's kind of morally neutral. But here Paul's got a Game of Thrones kind of like theme going on.
Let the judgment commence.
Yes.
What a very carnal choice you've made.
Interesting that Christmas wasn't enough for either of your jumpers and it needed another
No, we needed more.
pop culture world reference.
Interesting. Yes,
It's
Jesus is not Christ alone
Yeah.
is being
Not enough.
denied.
Yeah.
No,
by our
we just need a
jumpers.
little bit more on top of Christmas. Christmas
Yeah.
plus.
There's a lot of judgment in this opening couple of minutes, isn't there?
Quite a bit. What are
Yeah.
we talking about?
Well, in a moment, hopefully, maybe you've seen the title. It's called Have Yourself a Carnal Little Christmas. And actually, as Christoph Keating has already jumped in, helpfully, to tell us, he says, for those not in the know, carne is meat or flesh in both Latin and modern-day Italian. So there you go. We're going to be thinking a little bit about
Yeah.
what carnal means at Christmas time and what that means for us. In regards to some of the things that are in the news at the moment. But before we get to that, let's just look back over the last week. So last week, if you were watching last week or you listened in, you might have heard some of our... we had some people with us who were coming for the intensive. I don't know what we call them. What do we call people who come to the intensives?
Guests.
Just guests.
Students.
Strangers who became friends.
Found a place in our
They
hearts,
did.
despite all the judgment. But that was last Monday, so they'd only been with us for kind of a day then, but they had a whole week with us. So can you guys tell us a little bit about kind of what went on during the week and what
Yeah.
happened there?
We were world building or talking about world building.
Right. Yes. World building. What is art? World building
Yeah.
and representation or representation of a truth that you
That's
already
right.
know in a different mode.
Yeah.
So God is into representing Himself in Christ. And building a world thereby, and we are world builders made by God to build our little miniature world where we represent truth to the world, and on it goes. So.
And we spent most of the week actually looking at the creative process and what we'd done in previous videos or books or curriculum or whatever it was. And then we'd talk about those and talk about the process of making them and potentially be asked how much they cost. That was a sort of consistent theme throughout. As part of that, I think we looked at the idea that world building is play and creative work is playing, because you're sort of doing a let's pretend kind of thing. So one diagram I like to draw is you draw a great big kind of arc, not a big boat, but a big kind of line, a curved line, and you label that reality, and then underneath it you'll draw a small one and you'll say play. So there's the real world, and then within the real world there's this play world. And it could be a game of chess, or it could be a video game, or it could be a book, or it could be a film, or whatever it might be. And there's a question when you're looking at that little world, that play world, about what's the correspondence between reality and this world. What is there in this little world that connects to reality? And asking the question is, well, sometimes it's good if it doesn't, because you can try other things out and you can, imagine different possibilities, and that's part of the enjoyment of it. So we looked quite a bit at that, and then as we were talking about that, we discussed how the worlds, the online worlds, the virtual worlds that we're part of, have some correspondence to reality. and the question is, are we becoming increasingly excited by living in a little play world, for good or for ill?
Mm-hmm.
And what is missing in those worlds, and what's exciting to explore? So that was one of the things we looked at.
Although which kind of reminds me of the Matrix kind of coming out. Matrix Resurrection is the new
think so. Yeah.
one coming
That's
out
the
in
new one.
cinemas. Like, is it coming out in cinemas, or do you just get it
Just
beamed
beamed
into your
to your
skull?
mind.
Kind of in your pod,
Yeah.
you can
Connect
your eyelids
back of
will
your
have
head.
it. Yeah, you'll have the impression of going and eating
Yeah.
popcorn, but actually, it's
we-
all a lie.
And do we know what it's about, the new one?
I don't know.
I don't think I've even seen the second and third one since I
No.
saw them in the cinema, because they weren't very good.
It just looked like a computer game, just like a really boring one, and a playthrough that somebody else is going through. But the original Matrix, I think, captured our imaginations as I think a whole generation of people started asking questions that philosophers had been asking for millennia, which is, what if I'm just a brain in a vat being poked by a mad scientist? And what if everything that I think is real is a game, is a simulation? How would I ever know that? Well, I guess reality would have to break in somehow from outside and do all that kind of stuff. But I think more and more people are starting to ask questions about whether life itself is a simulation, whether we're in a game, how could we ever know? And then also, so much of life is world building. I live in a sim world. I live on Twitter, where social interactions have been gamified, or Facebook, where social
And
interactions
we want
have
that
been.
to be the case. We want to be in that world.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, that comes up in the first Matrix, doesn't it? The guy, he doesn't want to be in the real world. He wants to go back in. He wants to taste the steak. And doesn't he say, like, I know I'm not eating steak. I know it's just a simulation, but I'd rather be having the steak.
Yeah.
So he'd rather be in the simulation than the real world.
Yeah. And then, Facebook has, Mark Zuckerberg has come out and said, we're now called Meta, because there's such a thing as a metaverse. Paul,
They've rebadged it.
what is this thing called a metaverse?
We're going to watch this trailer first? We're going to have that first?
Yeah.
Tom's trailer? Is that what we're going to?
Yes.
We're going to watch that.
Shall I tee it
Were
up?
you going to tee that
Tee
up
it
for
up,
us a
yeah.
little bit? Yeah,
So
just before we crack on
one
to the
of our
metaverse.
wonderful staff members, Thomas Thorogood, likes to play around with editing, and so he's edited together a parody trailer for The Social Network 2 into the Metaverse. So here it is.
So should we send it to first? Just a couple of people. The question is, who are they going to send it to?
Site got 2,200 hits within 2 hours.
22,000. Maybe we shouldn't shut it down.
I don't understand.
Which part?
A company with only 13 employees bought today by Facebook for $1 billion.
Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg talking about WhatsApp. And that's why he is spending $19 billion to buy it.
Do you think he deserves to know the truth?
The truth. What is the truth? I love bringing people together. How are we?
3 million extra votes that the other side have no idea exist.
My estimate for the Europe trip was a little off.
I suggest you get a job.
First rule of magic, always be the smartest guy in the room. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of the dark. They have to invent something so that they have something to blame.
To this idea of the metaverse. So Zuckerberg, was it maybe like 4 or 5 weeks ago now, announced this thing about the metaverse. And we were talking a little bit before about what is the metaverse. And I suppose in some ways, if we're thinking about what is it going to be, I suppose we're looking at kind of virtual reality, augmented reality stuff, but it's not something that's in the future. It's kind of something we're already living in, really. So, with the fact we've got our phones or our laptops or whatever, probably our phones mostly, we open up our phone in the morning and you jump on social media and you talk to people, and then you get your emails, and then maybe you have a Zoom meeting or a team meeting, and then you can go on Amazon and buy whatever you want. And then you can do, gaming as well. Like, you were kind of already living in this sort of a type of virtual reality anyway. But Zuckerberg's thing seems to be about kind of what's the next step of that and taking it on to the next level. So in his presentation, when he talked about the metaverse, he has a guy, he says, things have changed a lot over the last 18 months or whatever. Home working's probably here to stay. And he has a guy kind of going into the kitchen, sitting down at the table, hitting a little button, and the office basically appears around him. So there's Bob and Sandra, whoever it is, in the office. Although he's still in the kitchen, drinking his cup of coffee, he's now got all his work stuff there. You can see the people. They're all kind of cartoony, like avatars. And then he says, oh, hey, let's have a meeting. And a few people say they're free, and they all appear in another little room, and they're like it's a bit like Star Wars, with the holograms around them and stuff. And he even says that, like people having kind of holograms and things like that. But I guess so where we are now, I suppose there's a sense in which we still have quite a big distinction, I suppose, between what we see as reality and what's on our phones. But I guess the metaverse is looking at how much more that will begin to overlap. So there was talk of kind of, maybe you'll have like a pair of glasses, and I guess Google Glass was like a very early thing of this, where you might be talking to each other, we might be talking here now, but yet we would have other things going on in the lens that, we can be browsing other bits or buying things and whatnot. And, we were saying earlier that you could, you can go to the shops now, if you want to buy our groceries, you can go to the store, or you get your Tesco app up or whatever you use, and you do it that way. But it's possible that in the future, let's say there's the three of us, we could all be, Nate and I could be sitting at home in our, separate places with our glasses on, and we decide, hey, let's go to Tesco's, Eastbourne Tesco's or whatever. And so we're browsing the shelves of Tesco's, sitting in our seat at home. And actually I can bump into Nate in the virtual world and have a chat. Yeah. But Glenn's actually gone to Eastbourne Tesco's physically and is browsing, but he's got his glasses on, and he sees us because we're in that virtual environment, and all three of us can have a chat in the aisle. What
if you do that thing where you, in real life at the moment, you go to the Tesco, you see someone and you just buy the bakery bit, and you go, oh, hi, how are you? Right? Yeah, good. See, cool. And then you walk away.
Yes.
And then a bit later on, you're both in the aisle for the crisps.
Right. Yeah.
And then you're like, hey. And then it's like, oh, someone needs to leave.
Yeah.
Because we can't.
Or one of you just needs to be on your phone.
Yeah.
At that point, at that moment, you just need to be absorbed.
You take your phone. That's how you do it. So I sometimes hide in, behind an aisle, just going, oh, good. Have they gone yet?
That's tricky. That's tricky for you, Nate.
Yeah, it is.
At least you could say you've got
hold up a box of cereal.
Sorry, I got network problems, and then just gone.
But how different is that scenario from what we can already do? So, like, I can do all my shopping on an app right now while I'm having a chat with you, and I can also have like a Zoom app open on this or WhatsApp open on this, and we can like zoom in friends while I do my shopping, while we're in the room, while somebody else is in another part of the world.
There is the difference that you're turning the online shopping, scrolling through to get the different things, you're turning that into a more physically oriented thing that you can walk around.
Yes.
And so that's actually a sort of virtual reality or gamified concept.
Yes.
That your avatar, I mean, but in the metaverse, are they saying that you will upload a version of yourself, or are you as free to decide what you want to look like in the metaverse as you would be in a game of Fortnite or something, where you can just change your skin, and be Spider-Man or?
I think it's that. I think longer term it's that second one, because already we do that, don't we? On like Instagram, you have like the filters, and so that already on like something like that, Zuckerberg is saying you can make yourself look like what you want to look like.
Yeah.
But I suppose you could just go into augmented reality as you are.
Yeah.
But why not have it that
Why not slightly improve yourself?
Yeah, or even just like if you're working from home, why not sit in your tracksuit, but just put the virtual suit on for everyone to see.
Pretty cool.
You know, like,
and it's very empowering. You know, so I've got a friend who I first knew only through Twitter, and then I went and preached at his church. Had no idea when he like comes down the church aisle in a wheelchair, and he's profoundly disabled.
Yeah,
and I had absolutely no idea whatsoever. And you know, he doesn't make a thing of it on Twitter, and it's just, you know, there is his avatar next to everyone else's avatar, and it's profoundly leveling and profoundly kind of, you know, he is able to present himself to the world the same as everybody else presents themselves to the world, which is not you know, his physical reality. And that's true of all kinds of people. There are so many introverts, for instance, who find a voice online, or, you know, there are so many people who, because they can present themselves in a different way online, have a voice that they otherwise didn't. You know, which is a positive.
Yes, and I mean the amazingly powerful thing that people can exceed physical limitations to some level by engaging with the world that is a play world or a world that is virtual. I mean the game Ready Player One, which is a book, and then Wood Spielberg did the film, is kind of this same concept of I think it's called the Oasis, and there is this virtual reality game that even if you live in basically a scrapyard, you can get some kit and you put it on, and then you enter into the world. But what's fascinating with that is that everyone's operating and living out their lives and buying clothes and hanging out and going out to parties and socializing and playing all kinds of games together. But then the person who's built this world has laid into it a certain number of keys by which you can sort of win. And so everyone gets this chance to play this single game, and within that game you get to experience it. But weirdly, even though you know that the central character is standing in his living room wearing his full VR set with gloves and everything, you couldn't do the film just showing him in his living room.
Right. Yeah.
But in a sense, that's reality. Within the Ready Player One, that is the truth, and that this Oasis is a made-up thing, and everything that he's doing is fake. And same as in The Matrix, they choose, okay, let's try to, you know, I'd rather live with the lie, as it were, and know that the stake's not real, than have to confront the brutal reality, which is that most of the world's population are just bodies in baths plugged into the Matrix.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the discussion around the metaverse, is it just, will it be an increasing escape from reality for people?
Yeah.
That actually people look around and say, well, the world is quite brutal and dark, and actually not only can I get away from that, you know, now we can do it. We can turn on the TV and watch Netflix and watch a film, and we can escape into a book or whatever. But what if I can actually create my own world? So, you know, again, talking about this, Zuckerberg has obviously come up with the metaverse, but he will not be Facebook's metaverse, or Meta's metaverse will not be the metaverse. There will be Google's version, and there will be, you know, Apple's version.
Google's version, which would be the same as Facebook's version, but white instead of blue, and very unpopular.
But there will be, you know, there will be the Disney version, and there will be the, you know, the Harry Potter version, and the people who will just kind of escape into these worlds. And there's this sense in which it's kind of just getting away from reality into what they see as kind of this is my best life in here, you know, living in this space. This is what it would look like in the ideal world for me.
Yeah. That's what's helpful for you to set things up in terms of there's reality and there's play.
Yeah.
Because I think, okay, so there's the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
And so God plays around, you know, and makes us just cause, not because he had to. But then he anchors himself to that universe that he's made, and kind of justifies its existence and takes it upon himself, such that God the Son becomes God our brother forevermore. And so his little world has a reality to it because it's bestowed from its maker.
Yeah.
And now here we are in our little world, and fundamentally we live before the face of God, and fundamentally we live as creatures of this God, and we need to figure out what that's like. We can also do a godlike thing. We can be creators of little worlds, and we can play around, and that's what creativity is, and that's what gaming is, that's what all this kind of stuff is, and that's brilliant. But what we always try to do, I think, is forget about that vertical relationship with the ultimate maker, and then we're going to be gods. And like, if we're going to be primarily we're going to be gods without first being a creature, then we're going to invest in the little worlds that we make, and play will become our entire life, and we'll lose touch, I think, with that kind of ultimate reality.
Yeah, and it's why I use the word reality when I do that larger arc. Is because depending on who you're speaking to, what will they put in that place of what is real? What's real and what's the made up thing? What's the pretend thing and what's the real thing? And the challenge within Ready Player One, the example, or The Matrix, is that the real is the cold, suffering, awful place. And the make-believe is the escape. So what you're trying to do is to avoid suffering, to avoid the problems, to transcend your issues by entering into a virtual world, a secondary domain where you can be what you want to be. And the challenge is, if we think that the outermost sphere of what's really real is suffering and horror and bleakness, then of course we'll just retreat inside and escape and want to stay there forever and not want to confront our real life problems, because what we're saying in the gospel is reality as it is Father, Son, Spirit, eternally three in one. And that's God is love. And light and life and
reality's good.
Reality's brilliant. Like it's amazing. And it happens that the world that God has made is not the final truth, right? The suffering that we experience in this life is not the final truth. And yet this is the glory of Christmas, that into our darkness comes Christ. So you'll often get it with, I think it's in Free Guy, which is the new what was the guy? Ryan Reynolds, yeah. Right. Is that the game makers join in the game. They enter into it. And that's the only way to solve the problem in the game is to enter into it. And at Christmas, it's Christ entering into the world that he has made, God becoming man. And the challenge is that it's flesh. He takes on, so we call it carnal Christmas. He becomes meat. And most of the things we're talking about when we talk about our own little play worlds are not fleshly, are not physical.
Discarnation.
Yes, it's a virtual. There is no spoon, right? It's all digital. It's all
just numbers,
zeros and ones. Yeah. So that's the challenge, is that the more we try to escape our physicality, retreating into a virtual world, a world of make-believe, we actually deny that Christ takes on our flesh, that he's met us in The Metaverse. That's not good anyway.
It's medicine meat.
He says, "Nice to meet you."
Hey.
There we go.
Meet you. Yeah.
There is a meet the nativity. Yeah, exactly.
But because I mean, I think that idea, like you say, of if this is the cold, if the outside sphere is the cold, dark sphere, I mean, some people have kind of picked up on the C.S. Lewis quotes that we've probably all used before. You know, if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. And I suppose what this kind of metaverse thing does is, perhaps in a way I hadn't seen before, is, you know, as Christians we say, well, there is another world, and it's out there. You know, there's another outer sphere, which is the real reality. Yeah. Not that this isn't real, but there is a greater reality. And it's a good place to go out, you know, to Jesus, to be in him and with him. But what the metaverse does says, yes, you have these desires, but the answer is for you to go into something else, which you are God of, you are in control of, and it becomes incredibly inward looking. Yeah. Rather than outward focus.
Yeah. Is it worth pressing into the difference? I'm just speaking out loud as I think, but I'm just freestyling here.
I like it when you speak out loud. One of my favourite ways you speak.
Thinking out loud, rather. So, is Ready Player One and The Matrix quite different? In that Ready Player One is here's a terrible world, but I can escape into this sort of computer simulation. Whereas in The Matrix, the simulation kind of is the prison. And yes, it's kind of a nice prison, but it's precisely what the machines have done in order to enslave humanity. And they need to wake up to sort of reality, as opposed to going into, you know, the Ready Player One game. And I just wonder whether the gospel is a lot more like The Matrix than it is like Ready Player One, in that. We foolishly think that the steak that we have or the mud pies that we make in the slum is what's going to get us the satisfaction that we crave. But instead, it's the one from outside that sort of breaks in. I don't know. That's just me thinking out loud.
The thing about Ready Player One is that the game, the Oasis, has been effectively taken over and twisted from its original intent.
Okay. I forgot. I have seen it. I've forgotten.
So I forget the name of the characters, but he is he's made this, and same with Free Guy, right? Exactly the same. There is a game designer who's built this really good game. Someone else, basically greedy and looking for money, has taken over the algorithm and has chosen to distort it and make it something that the original author never really intended. Mm-hmm. And yet the original author has built into this fictional, this virtual world, has built in a means for its redemption, right? Which the player entering into the game, and this would be the same for Neo, can, as long as he's within that, playing by the rules of the game, abiding by those, submitting to the rules of the game, but bringing about the eucatastrophe, which then ripples out from the central game into the real world outside the game within the film. Yeah. Or within the book.
Yeah. So where do they get their ideas from?
I don't know.
Yeah.
No idea.
They're just telling the great story, aren't they? In all of that. But I wonder whether... Because I think The Matrix has returned us to talking about being a slave of ultimate reality in a way that we haven't been used to. So, you know, Descartes did it famously, you know, back in the 17th century, and Plato talked about it. So Plato talked about we're in a cave, and all we can really see, our backs are to the wall, our backs are to the mouth of the cave where reality's happening, and there's a sort of a light being cast onto the back of the cave wall, and all we get to see is shadow. Yeah. While the reality, and we can never leave the cave. And he sort of thought that philosophers probably could, because philosophers can think their way to ultimate reality. But that was very obvious to Plato that we are in Neo's position. We are in a pod, and our eyelids are fluttering, and that's kind of, and we're not tasting the real steak. Descartes famously goes into an oven and, you know, starts to doubt everything, and he can doubt all his senses. The one thing he can't doubt is that he exists, and so he says, I think, therefore I am. I doubt, therefore I am, and sort of starts to build up a knowledge from that. But I think since Descartes, and the triumph of science and the triumph of kind of having mastery over this world, we haven't been used to thinking that I live in a simulation. Because we haven't been used to being the one who's in the play area, right, and someone else is in charge. Yeah. We've been used, since the Enlightenment, since the scientific revolution, we've been used to being the ones who are making the world and understanding the world and being gods over the world. And I think it's a new thought for a lot of people to start thinking about the simulation. But I think it's quite a healthy thought for people to start thinking, maybe it's not about what world you can build. Maybe you're in somebody else's world. Yeah. And whatever we can do to wake people up to, I don't know, maybe this is a simulation.
And so how do we think that kind of Christmas plays into that? Because we're talking about have yourself a carnal little Christmas. And, we're clearly thinking there about incarnation. And I guess all of us, well, probably any Christian who hears about incarnation, we know what we're talking about when we talk about God becoming flesh. But what difference does that make in this kind of discussion?
He comes to justify our existence, like at every level. He comes to make it so we're not just in a game. Yeah. But he bestows on us his ultimate reality, because we are a game. We are play for him until he absolutely earths himself to us and earths himself to us forevermore. So like Jesus justifies us. Yes, he justifies us, by declaring us righteous instead of sinners and all that. But he actually justifies our existence by taking flesh, by pledging his own life and being to his creation forevermore. So I mean, we did last year, Let Me Go There. It was a film about a father and a son, and there's a snow globe, and the son gets to see that if you go into this snow globe, it's full of dark, dangerous, but also beautiful, broken glory in there. And he realizes that if he goes into this world, it will cost him everything, and still he says, let me go there. And, it's this idea of the son has come into our worlds like that sun in the snow globe to turn it into God's worlds and to ground and earth our existence and to make us realize there is a true stake, and it's better than anything that we've sort of digitally enjoyed through the simulation. So it's everything. Like the incarnation's everything, and I think it's just fascinating to me that we look at other cultures that haven't trusted the reality of this world. You go east in philosophy, and they're much more likely to say that there's a veil of illusion over us and we can't really know the world, and we find that really weird. But I think we find that weird because we've been inhabiting the Christian revolution where Jesus has kind of really earthed earth to heaven and said, no, this world, I know your senses can deceive you and that kind of stuff, but look at me. And when you look at me, you're in touch with something that's real and deep and true. And I think the more that we have looked at him, the more we've been able to treat the world as a real place. And I think no wonder we've then got to be able to do science and all that kind of stuff. But then the more we've been able to do science, the more we've thought to ourselves, oh, I'm the master of this domain. I'm the one who can now play and be godlike and make other worlds. And we've escaped off in that direction. But, man, what is Christmas? Christmas is God taking the wheel of his own world and pressing home on the GPS. Taking the wheel of this world and anchoring us to himself.
And that he's still man in heaven. Yeah. And it's not as though he, I'll put on, I'll join the game. Yeah. I'll join in for a little bit. I'll sort out the problem. And then I'm going back and, it's that we have a man at the right hand of the Father.
Forevermore. Yeah.
forever, and that decision to take on flesh was a decision that is not reversible
Yeah.
in a way.
Right. Yeah.
There's sort of no. He's not going to go back on that.
Yeah.
So that our humanity is not the problem. That we need to sort of get rid of that, and then the idea of heaven as a or the new heavens and the new earth being physical,
Right.
and now I want to go back to thinking about when people present themselves online. Right. And the possibility that you can be something that you are not, right? So in Ready Player One, there's all sorts of characters who choose to be completely different inside the game because you can pick whatever you want to be. You can choose, and it's let's pretend, open up the dressing up box, and we can put it all on. Now the problem we have with that is because you can deceive. Right, so you can go online and you can meet someone, and they can, because they control what you see of them. It's a curated existence. You can't be sure that you know the truth about this person, and so the danger of meeting people online, and particularly having kids who may play online games, and thinking, okay, we need to do a lot of safety because there's a lot of people out there who will present you one thing, but then there's something different in real life. And I loved something that you'd said about Christ coming, and your distinction was not in real life or in the game. The distinction you had was at work or at home. So Christ, as we see him at work in our salvation, is the same as God is at home.
Right.
God is not different at work than he is at home.
Yes.
And part of the challenge with any game that we play is that because it's a restricted view of someone, and we all know you can frame up your Zoom camera just to show what you want people to see, right? But if they walked into your room, they would actually see what it was like. We know that potential for a distorted view or a restricted view, which is by its nature a distortion.
Yeah. That's why, like, the lyric. I mean, I hate taking apart Carol's lyrics, but the one that I regularly change is in "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," "Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see." I prefer to sing "Now in flesh, the Godhead see," but just because veiled makes it sound like, okay, this is his avatar. What he's like in his room gaming is totally different.
That's interesting, because with that one, I think I've always seen the veil being torn. So the flesh, the curtain is his body, which is torn. And so that was a connection I would make. But
Yeah.
So, but I can see what you mean. Veil sounds like...
Yeah, like a mask, and behind it, he's quite a different character.
Let's not get onto masks.
Okay. But yeah, he is as he is towards us, and how he is in the game.
Yeah.
How he is on earth is how he is eternally.
Yeah.
So like John 10:17, Jesus says, "The reason the Father loves me is because I lay down my life." And he's like this is wild. He's kind of he's connecting the eternal life of God to him laying down his life on the cross, which is the most sort of fleshly kind of weak thing that he could do. And he's just like, no, that father-son love is expressed best when I take flesh and die for the sins of the world. So it's beautiful. So the incarnation is our only hope of knowing, like, we are real, the world is real, God is real, because our Maker takes all of that to himself and says, here I am, and having descended to the utter depths to meet us, like we don't have to ascend to kind of figure out what God is like. Down he comes all the way. And it really is our only hope to know that we're not in a simulation, or okay, we're in a kind of a simulation that has been justified, that has been anchored to something eternal and true, and now I don't need to escape this game. I don't need to escape the earth. I don't need to escape my creatureliness, my embodied nature. I can, as an image bearer of God, now make little worlds, and that's quite fun. as a pastime, but I don't now have to escape my physical reality and my embodied reality in order to be the spiritual person that God has made me to be. You know.
Do you think that we see the incarnation as that important in our circles? Because you said earlier, and you've just kind of really said the same kind of thing, the incarnation is everything. But apart from kind of Christmas time, when we might give a kind of few cursory sermons on God with us, and he became, well, like we said the other week, oh look, he's a baby, cool, and great, let's move on.
But he didn't stay a baby.
You morons. Do you think? Because it's in my mind, I don't think we talk about incarnation that much, or think about what the ramifications are there for further down the line. So, because at least in our circles, I don't think we do that. What do you think are some of the weaknesses or issues we come up against then?
I think one of the signs that we don't really have a theology of incarnation is like when The Matrix came out. For the next 10 years, every youth leader's illustration that they took from The Matrix was the whole red pill, blue pill thing. And, if you take the red pill, then you're choosing to leave the simulation and know the truth. And if you keep on with the blue pill, you're choosing to be within the simulation. And you just think of all the things that you could make an analogy of all the stories you could tell based on The Matrix. It's like it's screaming incarnational themes to you the whole time. And the one thing we take from it, it's about being red pilled. It's about you making an individual choice. And I just, our gospel is just based on individual choice, as opposed to this much richer thing. And so The Matrix is closer to the gospel in so many of our gospel presentations.
You should just hit play and let people watch it.
Just watch The Matrix. And we've got a real dearth of properly incarnational thinking. You were talking about Matthew 1 the other day, and it's the typical thing, isn't it, about the names of Christ?
Yeah.
And one of the names is Christ, and another name is Jesus, which means Savior. And then at the end of Matthew 1:18, or Matthew 1 from verse 18 to 25 is Emmanuel, God with us. And it always seems to me like we focus on Jesus, the Savior from our sins, which is absolutely true. But we tend to think that Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, that's a lovely warm voice that the Anglicans can get excited about for a little bit because they're a bit woolly and liberal. Right, and isn't it nice that God is with us, as though it's a lovely warm hug from on high, but like God with us, like if we are really people who believe in the atonement, well, here is the at-one-ment, God and man together. Emmanuel is like the deepest truth about atonement,
and because when we talk about God being with His people, dwelling with His people, and we think in terms of the new creation and revelation. I think probably we have that bigger sense of like, wow. But when we have the kind of God with us in Nazareth, it's like, it's just a nice cozy thing. Yeah. It's not this kind of groundbreaking, like incredible.
But is that because people just don't know what to do with God with us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They don't know.
So. You don't have a theology
to. And is the fact that Christ ascends... Does that then feel, God was with us?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So God was one of us. Just a slob.
Just a slob.
I'm one of us. What if? Yeah. Nobody calling on the phone. Except, who knows? But is that because we say, he was with us for a little bit and then he went away and then he sent us the Spirit, which... we're all fans of the Spirit. We all like him. He's great. He's here.
Remember the Spirit. He's not an it. It's a he.
He's not an it. It's a he.
It's a he.
It's the best line.
What one of my Australian youth workers once said. But anyway. Yeah.
So, but we don't really know what to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
We go, we might have some recollection of some liturgy of how the Holy Spirit relates to us and relates us to God. But it's often disconnected from what Christ does in the incarnation.
Right. Yeah.
And so the idea that Emmanuel, God is with us still.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, we are with him as well, right?
Right.
You died, you're now seated with the Father.
Right. Right.
That feels to me like the misstep is that we love the his name which shall be Jesus, which means the Lord saves. Swoops down, saves us, off he goes. Because you don't want to leave people in the misery. And the fear is that if you only have a God with us.
Right.
So I think it's people want, I'm assuming this is why people do it. I don't think consciously they're doing it. But the fear is if you only have an Emmanuel, God with us, he doesn't solve anything. He's just here. He says, yeah, me too.
Yeah. Misery loves
also,
company.
tell me about it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But without that, the Savior
Yeah.
has no connection with you. There's no real relationship
Yes.
in that sense.
And I think because we teach kind of atonement in more mechanistic terms, it's kind of Christ zapped over there, so you're blessed over here.
Yeah.
And I mean, even in our language, we talk about how the cross saves us. You know, which of course the cross does not save us at all. Like I honestly wonder whether people think that kind of God could have zapped the wood of the cross. Jesus got in the way, or something like. How does the cross never saved anybody?
Yeah.
God incarnate dying on the cross saved us. Right? The cross, but we're so mechanistic in it, and so what does Jesus need to do? I guess he needs to get in the way of the thunderbolt. And so he takes the thunderbolt, and then everything else about his substitutionary work is kind of forgotten. It's just this sort of one-off. He takes the thunderbolt. We are now left in the neutral state, and hooray, you know, as opposed to he becomes one with us and sums us up before the Father, including on Good Friday, summing up our sin and our curse and our hell, and taking us through the fires of God's judgment. That is a salvation. And I often think it's kind of, we have these debates about like the most important aspect of the cross and what to preach about the cross. And it sort of so often reminds me about, it's almost as if like Jews would be discussing which of the goats on Yom Kippur was more important. Was it the scapegoat or was it the one for the Lord? I'm not really sure. And the whole time the high priest is standing there saying, I'm the one who carries the blood into the heavens and carries you on my heart. And we just don't have that sense of Christ carrying us on his heart into heaven. And so it's and that then I think makes us more mechanistic, I think, in the gospel that we preach. But are we as personal as we might be if we're not talking about God with us? If it's about he saves us from our sins and there's a mechanism called the cross that gets us off the hell hook, we can be grateful for a mechanism, but where is the union with Christ kind of language? Where is the person of our Savior who has himself done it, as opposed to a what that so often gets preached when we talk about atonement? So,
and with the incarnation as well, there is the issue that we find it difficult to distinguish between, I forget where we got this phrase from, but it was fairly recently, sinfulness and skinfulness.
oh yes, yeah,
I can't remember where we got it from. Someone was written something.
yeah.
Anyway, if you know, we probably mentioned it in a different episode of the SpeakEasy.
Did Joshua Ryan Butler come up with that? I don't know. Let's give it to him. He's a nice guy. I like Joshua.
He
Ryan
can
Butler.
have it. But so, because Christ taking on flesh, and so much of what the Bible has to say about flesh is negative.
Yep.
And so we're like, oh goodness, how would you do that? And you know, one of the most influential preachers in my life and yours as well, Richard Buse. I love to take it. Say, want to understand the word flesh? Take the S off, take the H off, and spell it backwards. Self.
It's good, isn't it?
It's very good.
It's good.
I want to say it's actually sarx. If you take the X off and spell that backwards, it's very complicated.
Which I think was on Doctor Who. Was yeah.
But the idea of flesh as we wage war against the flesh, right? With the lusts of the flesh are to be overcome. We want to overcome our passions and our lust and our sin, and so we don't really have a place to put the fully incarnate Christ because we're like, oh, that's not a humanity that I recognize. It's not one that I really know.
Because it's sinless.
Because it's sinless. Because he is without sin.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at him, we're thinking, well, how is it possible? How could that happen, that someone could live a sinless life?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's inescapable for us.
Yeah.
So that's part of the chat. There's so much theological nuance required to talk through what it means to for Christ to be incarnate, that we get ourselves into all sorts of, and so therefore we avoid it, right?
Yeah.
Because it sounds difficult to parse between sinfulness and skinfulness.
It's not a different problem, though, to the problem of, is the world a good thing or a bad thing in the Bible? You know, God so loved the world, which actually in John's Gospel is mainly a system oriented against God and his Christ. And it is like this negative thing. And yet it is loved, and we are to live in the world. And yet we are not to love the world. You know, well, God loves the world, but we're not to love the world. And what does the world? But we are to live in the world, and we are to love the nations. And like, so, and how do we do that? Like, I guess there's two different meanings of world in that sense. There is a system that is opposed to God that we are not to get swept up in, and we are to resist. But there is a world that God so loves at the same time. And flesh is used similarly. Sometimes it's a translation problem, because I think actually the word flesh is so negative in our understanding that certainly like the NIV will not translate flesh as flesh. It'll sometimes say body when actually the Greek says flesh. So Galatians 2:20, I was crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. So Paul is happy to say, I do live a life in the flesh. Like, what do you mean? In sin and licentiousness? Like, no, he just means I can live a life embodied by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So there is like a positivity to the flesh. And the other thing about the humanity of Christ being sinless, don't the gospel writers do a fantastic job of showing sinless humanity that is actually attractive and that is like think about the artistic challenge.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know?
Was it writes white or something? Because you don't feel you've got something to grab hold of.
Yeah.
But of course, when, the only time we've ever seen sinless humanity, it's the most compelling picture of humanity it's possible to have.
Yeah.
And that's where you've really got to dive into the Gospels to say, and pray, show me Jesus, show me who you are, that I can get a deeper understanding of.
Yeah. Especially because look how embodied he is. Look how comfortable he is in his own skin.
Yeah.
Walks around planet Earth like he owns the place, and just the way he heals people. Like, he never heals two people the same way, but he's always physical and interacting with people. And think about the night before his crucifixion, and they've eaten a great meal, they've drunk wine, they've sung a hymn, and John, the beloved disciple, rests on the chest of Jesus, rests his head on the chest of Jesus, and Old King James, in the bosom of Jesus, who himself is in the bosom of the Father. But that comfortability with his physical embodied life, and you just think, that's it, that is the life. And it's not up on a cloud in the ninth dimension having Novocaine bliss. It's the actual embodied Jesus singing a hymn, eating a meal, drinking wine, hugging a mate.
Well, that was interesting. Yesterday, the church we were at was looking at, in its Advent passages, Zephaniah 3 and 17 being the key one, and the idea of the Lord who saves is a mighty warrior, right? Who sings over you.
Wow.
And you think, when you see that portrayed on screen, if you usually like the Welsh rugby team or something like that, right? These warrior men, just absolute kind of humongous, like, you do not want to get in their way, and they're absolute giants. and they've got these fantastic beards and sometimes massive locks of hair. Like, who was the French guy?
You sounded Welsh when you said the massive locks.
Massive locks, luscious, great hair. But then they sing, and you imagine them singing over a child or a loved one, and you think, whoa, that's a vision of humanity you can get behind, which is engaged in physical activity.
Very much so. Yeah.
And that's where we, I mean, you can have a conversation about, what's been anthropomorphized, and what's the picture we're being given. But it's a picture we're being given by God of him acting in ways which are recognizable to us.
Yeah.
As human activities.
Yeah. 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 And so maybe singing is, I mean, singers will tell you need your whole body to sing, and you need to look up to sing high and look down, look down. No wonder that's a low note that you sort of strike, and therefore, like, how did we ever get to the view that singing in heaven is this ethereal thing, when actually you see like a Welsh male choir, and you see it's a very physical thing. Yeah, it's a very earthy thing. But yeah, do we live well embodied lives? Maybe should we talk about like in the church and outside the church with 3 minutes to go?
Yeah. Okay, they're the two. Yeah. Only two possible realms.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. That which is in and
that which is in and that which is out. Just those two.
Yeah.
Like, are there ways that we are not expressing ourselves bodily in a way that we might otherwise?
Within the church.
Within the church, let's start.
I suppose when it comes to things like, I can just listen to the service afterwards. With particular situation of the last 2 years, all sorts of churches which couldn't meet and then had to sort of provide online. And the fear is that people get very comfortable with that and think, well, Mark Zuckerberg says I can go to work from home, so I'll go to church, the church of the living room, and then stay there. And so you get comfortable doing that, and it doesn't require your physical attendance.
Apparently.
And so you start to think, well, now there's just a few kind of ideas and feelings that I need to get from to feel that I've sated my spiritual needs for today. My church life can be dealt with by just what I listen to and what I watch.
Yeah.
Rather than when you're physically present with the body, there's all sorts of ways that you are demonstrating your fellowship with your, other people in the church.
Do you think though, if technology gets to a certain stage where, at the moment you go on YouTube, we sit in our living room, we watch YouTube, we watch the church service, and that's it. We don't see anyone, there's no contact. But what if it does get to the stage where we sit down on the sofa and we press the button and we look like we're all sitting in the pews, and I am sitting next to you, and I got my cup of coffee afterwards, and I am chatting to you in the building.
Here's the thing, right? So I was chatting with a couple of interns today about the friendships you make online, and if you don't have physical proximity with people and physical contact with people, can you have those as friendships? Does that sort of count? How far can those things go? And it was very interesting because earlier on, I was said I had a bit of a headache, and so very kindly, I was offered some painkillers. Now, you can't do that when you're living virtually.
There's probably an app for that, isn't there? A
Deliveroo.
Deliveroo goes to Boots and then to your house.
Your ailments, though, are kind of... So if someone drops off a meal at your house or something like that, that's very different. So there's the eating, but your physical... We're also talking about most of us who are incredibly healthy, and who don't have physical needs in the way that people at either end of life do. So with infants and the elderly. And most of us manage to avoid being physically dependent on other people for a good chunk of our years. But the church is made up of people all the way through life.
Yep.
And with all sorts of different personal challenges that they face, and who have physical needs which are met by other people.
And we're commanded to have a meal, not drop off a meal. 1 Corinthians 10:17, we who are many are one body, for we all share the one bread. That's a massive verse, isn't it? Like you can't be one body if you don't share one bread. How do you do that online?
Yeah.
How do you, like Pete, one of the interns, was talking about like virtual church. You can get baptized. Like somehow you can have a virtual experience, VR church
VR baptism.
of being baptized, like with meta water. Like what? Let's. So I think like the sacraments and just show that you just can't do it.
Yeah.
But, part of the reason why we don't first think sacraments is maybe because we're not thinking incarnationally anyway. We're not thinking particularly physically. And so, I think within the church, we don't take the sacraments particularly seriously, or sung worship. A lot of the charismatic churches were sort of much more exercised about, well, if we can't sing, what's that all about? Whereas our kind of churches were more like, well, it was kind of an embarrassing part of the service anyway.
Barely sing anyway.
Very good point.
But so the physicality of singing, the physicality of the sacraments, that's not a massive deal for us. Sabbath is not a massive deal for us. It's kind of... Because, I take the office with me to the beach even, because it's in and so a physical no to labor and yes to embodied rest is not really something we think is very important,
Well, that's the church sorted.
Church, yep.
Outside the church, though.
Outside the
How
church.
what does it look like to miss the truth of the incarnation? I mean, in one sense, they miss it anyway because they're denying the incarnation. But what does it look like when that's lived out?
Well, it's a struggle to live an embodied life.
Yeah.
And obviously you can fall off both sides of the horse, and you can therefore worship the creation.
Yeah.
Or you can just denounce and deny the creation. You can worship your body, or you can not treat your body very well. And we're always finding it difficult, and this is true of Christians as well. It's not unique to those outside the church. We all find it difficult to live in our bodies. We all find it difficult to live with our biology, with our constraints, with our limits, with our gender, with any number of physical givens that we're always trying to transcend. I don't want to be me in the body that God has given me.
Yeah.
And so, you get body dysphoria, and you get eating disorders, and you get exercise addiction, or you get slovenliness and obesity, and, we really struggle to live with brother ass. So Aquinas called the body is brother ass, which is quite a nice kind of, it sort of talks about how the body is both like beloved and kind of base at the same time. And there's something quite silly about our bodies, and it's the stuff of comedy, and our bodies make noises and smells, and they leak, and they're decrepit, and they fall apart, and it's actually quite, it's quite base. It's it's an ass, but it's brother ass, and sort of Aquinas was sort of trying to talk about how donkey is what I mean, Paul.
Right.
Don't know what you're implying,
brother donkey. But but it's just a perennial problem. How do you properly take care of your body without worshiping it, or without just like hating on it?
Yeah.
And without Christ, who assumed our body and took our punishment to rise up again and give us blessing in his body, we do one of those two things. Just as the sacrifice of the Old Testament was kind of honored and revered and held up, and then, harmed. I think we have the same problems with our bodies. Without Christ, now our own body becomes the thing that we lift up before the Lord, before the world, And some of us are more into the worshipping of our bodies, and some of us are more into the harming of our bodies. But we just don't know how to treat our bodies. And so self-harm, massive thing. Body dysphoria, massive thing. Trans ideology, massive thing. You know.
And that idea that you'd rather live in the virtual world.
Yes.
Because it is, your body isn't the issue. You're not, constrained by it.
Yeah.
And you can express who you really want to be.
Yeah.
More clearly. I am sort of struck by that anecdote you mentioned about meeting that guy who was severely disabled. But online, there was this freedom to communicate and to just talk without the challenge of that. And I suppose that sense that resurrection body,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the incarnation and the resurrection going together, the bodily resurrection and bodily ascension, being all part of one piece.
Yes.
And that then being the hope for us, because it's not just that Jesus comes down and goes, yeah, I know what it's like. It sort of sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, no, actually, in the salvation, all of our life is going to be redeemed.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and he has bestowed forevermore a glory and a dignity to the human body, because he's got one forever.
Yeah.
And it'll be a human hand that receives us into heaven, you know. It'll be the human Christ who reigns on the throne of David in this world, you know, ruling over this earth. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we probably could have kept talking about some of those things for another hour, but we've kind of run out of time, so we probably have to wrap it up there. But hopefully you found that helpful. And if you want to keep up with bits and bobs that we're doing here at Speak Life, you can find, well, first of all, hit subscribe here on YouTube. Where am I looking? One of these. And over there. And we're on all this.
You just changed it.
Jumping
They literally changed it.
Can't get the staff. So hit subscribe on YouTube. This one. And of course, we're on the social medias on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So find us there. We're still on TikTok as well.
We're there. I mean, we haven't taken down the channel.
We've done a lot, yeah. But you can find us there. Give us ideas of what to do. And of course, everything we do here just relies on people like you and your support. So if you would like to support us, prayer is obviously the thing that all of us can do, and that's great, and we really appreciate that. So please do be praying for us. And if you want to know what to pray for, why not sign up to our newsletter, which you get on email. So go to speaklife.org.uk/sign up. But if you are someone who might be able to donate to us financially, go to speaklife.org.uk/give. And there are lots of different ways to give there. And you'll also get some benefits, such as being able to come and join us on our Discord server, which is beginning to take off a little bit, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not entirely discarnated. You know, we share prayer requests and talk about, the real world.
It's growing. So, yeah, do come and join us there. We hope you found this helpful. Glenn and Nate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul Feasy.
And we'll catch you all soon. Take care. Good night.
See you later.
Bye.